Anne is a natural dyer and textile artist based in DC. Her focus is in color experimentation, surface design, and education. Most recently, Anne participated in the Natural Dye Initiative at MICA in Baltimore, where she has met a wonderful group of textile artists who have helped shape the way she approaches natural dyeing as a practice. She is part of a textile collective from DC called To Dye For Collective. Over to you, Anne.
Hi, everyone. My name's Anne. Thanks for joining me today. I'm starting out this session outside in my own personal dye garden. Since today is all about fresh leaf extraction of the indigo plant, I just wanted to show how it grows in my backyard um, and just sort of give you an example of what you could potentially do in a small, even like a very small space. So I live in Washington, D.C. My outdoor space is super limited, but I'm really grateful to have this very tiny, probably 7 foot by 2.5 foot deep garden in my parking spot, actually. Um, Thankfully, I get tons of sun, um, which is really great for growing indigo. But the process is super simple. And the reason I want to start here is just to sort of encourage anyone, regardless of how small or how large of a yard you have, or maybe you don't even have a yard and you have containers on your patio or on your front porch, anyone can grow this type of Japanese indigo. The particular kind that I'm working with today is called Persicaria tinctoria. There's many varieties of indigo, so it's important for me to specify which particular kind I'm using. And this Persicaria tinctoria is very good for the fresh leaf extraction that I'm going to demonstrate in the second portion of this workshop. Along with indigo, just to give you a little tour of the garden, I also have marigold. And marigolds are one of my favorite dye plants to work with. Marigolds yield so much color in just a small amount of flower, and you just use the heads of them. And the two grow really easily side by side. As you can see, my garden is very just sort of wild. I'm not very, I haven't kept it very, kempt or, uh, I just sort of let it grow as it likes. Along with marigold in the garden, I have some cosmos, and they're kind of hiding over there. If I move the camera, I think it gets a little bit too shaky, but I can pull a leaf, a flower over so you can see. But I also have sulfur cosmos, which are another beautiful dye plant, really great for eco printing, and works perfectly in the garden back here. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but to give you a sense of the type of conditions that I'm working with for my garden, I am south facing. Um, there is very little coverage, no trees. I just live kind of surrounded by buildings. So this plot gets a lot of sun, which is perfect for indigo. I think perfect for marigolds. That is one thing to consider is if you're thinking about growing your own Japanese indigo at home, you want a lot of sun, access to water, and also well draining soil. Um, those are all the types of conditions that you're really looking for. The thing that I love about the indigo is that based on where you're located, most people can get between 2 and 3 harvests a season, meaning, at one point, let's say in July, I can cut all of my indigo down once it's reached an ideal height of about 2 to 3 feet, harvest those leaves, and then the indigo will grow again. And towards the end of August to September, maybe sometimes October, you can get a second yield from this indigo plant. I'm going to give you a little idea of up close of what the indigo looks like. So this is the indigo plant. You can see it's starting to develop some flowers at the top here that are just a slight shade of pink. The leaves themselves are very big. They're kind of about 3 inches, maybe upwards of 4 inches. They can grow up to 7 inches big. But the color is a really nice, beautiful, deep green. Um, they grow kind of almost as easily as basil, I would say, and you only use the leaves. The all of the indigo color is pigment is contained in these leaves. The stems don't provide anything. You can see if you're looking at the stem, you can see it's divided by these nodes. So there's sort of these sections with these larger nodes here. When you're harvesting the indigo plant, you want to make sure that you're cutting it between the nodes, um, allowing for it to regrow. Um, One of the things that some in some of the reading from other dyers I've heard is that younger indigo leaves will yield more blue pigment, more color. And so, what one dyer, a really prominent dyer who works with indigo, Michelle Garcia, recommends is doing multiple clippings throughout the season of just the first 2 to 4 inches of your plant and working with just those leaves, which will contain the most amount of pigment throughout your season. Knowing when to harvest your indigo plant is really important also, and knowing what a healthy indigo plant looks like is important. You can see that all of these are really beautiful, rich, deep green color. I think that that indicates a nice, healthy plant. Something that is not quite as healthy, let me show you this here, is an indigo plant that has sort of reddish tips or a yellow appearance in the leaves, and that will indicate a plant that is maybe less ideal or less amount of pigment in that plant. Some of the things that can affect the conditions of the quality of your plant, of your indigo plant, or the amount of pigment is your soil, the amount, the quality of your soil, the amount of water your plant's been getting, all of those, the amount of sun, all of those things can kind of impact the health of the plant, therefore the amount of pigment that it yields. How to grow the indigo plant, I kind of skipped past that, so I'll backtrack a little bit. You want to plant the seeds indoors about 5 to 6 weeks before the last frost of the season. So, that typically is probably early spring, and you would start those in trays indoors. And then you can transplant those seedlings into your like final garden. That is going to give the plant enough time to develop and then really grow well once you're past frost. For me, I actually just direct sowed seeds into this plot after the first frost, and it was much more of just like a happenstance. Like, I wanted to see how it would go, and as you can tell, it worked out pretty well in my favor. The plants are a little bit crowded, but I think that all in all, it worked really nicely. Just direct sowing. I think this is a really great plant that you can start. Again, you can do it late in the spring before your last frost. You can direct sow. You can do it into your garden, or you can even start in containers. And that's why I think it's such a great dye plant to work with. The session today is going to be focused on fresh indigo leaf extraction. I think typically what people think of with indigo are these deeper, rich shades of blue, which come from creating an indigo vat. So that would be by way of creating a fermentation vat or a mineral vat. The fresh leaf extraction process is something that I think is really exciting because it's just made from harvesting the plant like this and then stripping these stems and using just the leaves. I think it's a really beautiful process because the color, as I'll show you in the second portion, is such a unique shade of teal aqua blue, and is very different than this kind of traditional blue, like rich, deep, saturated blue color that we think about for indigo. Are there any questions right now before I move on from this portion outside?
Thanks, Anne. That was cool. I have a question. Do you reseed the indigo in your yard or ever do a second crop during the season, or do you just work with kind of that initial seeding and the one crop?
I just work with the initial seeding because it does, again, like it can, you can do the multiple harvests per season. So I've never done I can't remember, like the staggered planting.
Mhm.
I'm sure that that's something that you could do, but that's not something that I have done before. Um, but yeah, I typically just plant it early in the season and then do the multiple harvests.
Perfect. Thank you. And here's a question from a participant. How hardy are these plants? Do they self-seed or do you replant them each year?
So that's a great question. You're supposed to replant them every year. I last year did not plant any indigo, but my um, but it actually self-seeded from the previous season, and I had a really beautiful amount of indigo last year from having done nothing and just from them having somehow made it through and self-seeded.
Love
But
it.
yeah, you're supposed to plant every single year. You would start the process every spring and sort of, go over. I think that the plants that have self-seeded and survived through the next season probably wouldn't be as healthy or yield as much color. That's actually the example. The ones that self-seeded is the example of the the leaves that are not quite as healthy that I showed you. So yeah.
Makes sense. Do you save seeds from year to year or do you buy new every year?
You absolutely can save your seeds. Absolutely save your seeds. Yeah. I think that a lot of, um, I think, I think a lot of people would encourage you to save your own seeds. But you can certainly buy. There are a lot of really great dye farmers who sell their seeds every single year. If you want to get a jump start on that, but yeah, you can certainly save your own.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Could you talk about like why you grow the indigo yourself? What are some of the advantages of growing it yourself?
Yeah, I think that honestly, it's more just a passion for me, not necessarily like a benefit. It's more maybe an emotional benefit. I just love
Mhm.
having the indigo in my yard. And I love being able to just see it. It grows so beautifully and it's so like lush and like verdant back here, I guess, that I just love having it as a part of my dye garden. I also like just being able, because I do work with indigo a lot, being able to show people that it is as easy as like I do not have a green thumb. I am not like an experienced gardener. Um, but the fact that I can have this really beautiful garden makes me really happy. And I just love being able to encourage other people who might be a little bit hesitant to start their own gardens and really like show them that it's possible. So
Great, thank you. And you mentioned a few of the other plants you grow. You mentioned marigold and you mentioned the cosmos. Any other dye plants, either that you grow or that a home grower might think about?
yeah, absolutely. So marigolds, again, my number one hands down favorite plant to dye with. Cosmos have also been really exciting for me recently because of its potential for eco printing. So that's a whole nother dye technique, but you can essentially print the actual flower shape and color onto garments. Um, and so I really love cosmos because they are just like bursting with color. For some reason, cosmos are literally everywhere in the city. They grow just like in medians on the highway, like they just grow everywhere. But in my particular garden, they haven't been able to fully succeed. However, I've seen so many other gardens where the cosmos have like really thrived. Specifically, the cosmos, the sulfur cosmos, which are the orange ones. There's another type of cosmos that have more of like the billowy stems and leaf structures. The red and pink ones, those also work for dye, but I really like the orange ones. Other ones that you can grow are coreopsis, Coreopsis, again, are another flower that, another plants that I think are meant to grow really easily and thrive in, not great soil. However, I've not had great luck with it. Um, Another flower that I have grown is scabiosas, pincushion flowers, and they are a really deep purplish burgundy color, and those are really, really great for natural dye. So those are all different types of dye plants that I have experimented with in my particular garden. You can also do things like sunflowers, zinnias. Um, there's just a lot of really great varieties of plants, but those are the sort of 5 that I typically work with.
Great, thank you. One question about Coreopsis. Someone asked, does that make a yellow dye?
Yeah, so one of the funniest things about natural, like particularly in this region, the Mid-Atlantic region, a lot of the flowers and plants that you'll get for dyeing will be shades of yellow. So, indigo being the sort of outlier in this particular case, which grows in many, many regions. In this East Coast area, goldenrod, for example, it's going to be yellow. Zinnias, despite the fact that zinnias come in many, many colors, are going to dye yellow. Marigolds, yellow. Coreopsis, I think, comes in like reds and yellow varieties. And so I think they might have different colors, but for the most part, yellow. So I know that that's not maybe as exciting for some people, but I really love the fact that you can just get so many different shades of that color from the plants around us. That's not to say that those are the only colors, but that's like the predominant color that sort of exists in this area.
Great, thank you. We have a question about storing plant material. Can leaves be stored for future use?
So it depends on how you plan to use. We're talking about indigo leaves. It depends on how you're using it. So in our demonstration today, using the fresh leaf extraction, doing the fresh leaf extraction, the plant needs to be harvested and used very quickly in order to get the colors and the color facets that we want. But if you are planning to save this to create to do like a vat, to create an indigo vat, you would take them and then dry them, or you can take them and dry them. Yeah, but I think that for our particular purposes today, you need to harvest and use pretty quickly.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, so I wanted to, now that we're inside, just give you an example of, or run through all the things that you need to accomplish fresh indigo dyeing. So the process that we're doing today is going to involve very few tools. And I think it's such a great process if you're a beginner dyer, if you have a small amount of fresh indigo plant that you've grown and you don't know what to do with it because maybe it's not quite enough to create a vat. I think this is just such a wonderful process and technique. The thing that you should note about the fresh indigo extraction process that we're about to do, it works best on animal-based protein fibers. So that means protein fibers are anything like wool, silk. Again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, something that comes from an animal. But this process does not work as well on cellulose fibers, which would be things that come from plants. So linens, cottons, those are just not going to be as ideal for this process. So if you have a skein of wool that you're hoping to use, or a silk scarf or an old silk top, I think this is kind of where this process works the best. So I want to show you all, first off, what we're going to need is the fresh indigo, which I just cut a bunch of indigo. I have about, I think maybe 12 stems here. You can see they're about, 1.5 to 2 feet tall. You can see now more closely how they kind of grow. And you can see the nodes that I was talking about, the different segments. The leaves are looking pretty great. What we're going to do for this process is we're going to strip all of these leaves off of the stem. And we're not going to use the stem itself. The stem is really fibrous. It's really thick. We're not going to use that, just the leaves. That's where all the color, the pigment is. So the first thing we need is the fresh indigo. The second thing that we'll need is, again, your fiber. So in this case, we'll be using two different types of silk. I have silk habotai, which is a really beautiful um, thin silk that has a bit of a sheen to it. It's quite sheer. I use it a lot just for workshops, but I think it creates a really nice, like scarf, but it's not necessarily thick enough for a garment. But I have a little bit of this habotai silk. I have a crepe de chine, which has a silk crepe de chine, which has a little bit more of a tooth to it. It's not quite as shiny as the habotai. It has a little bit more of like a rough texture, but I just wanted to kind of show you how the indigo takes on each of the different types of fabric. And then also I have a tiny amount of wool, just so we can see how the color looks in this. The fabric has not been pre-mordanted. Indigo does not require mordanting if you are at all familiar with natural dyeing. However, this fabric has been soaked in warm water, like just under a simmer, for about 10 to 15 minutes. The reason being is that I think it helps strip away some of the residue on the fabric, but this doesn't have to be pre-mordanted or scoured in the traditional sense of like other types of cellulose fiber or other types of fibers like in the cellulose world. So we're using these three different materials today. What else you'll need today would be a blender and a bowl of ice and cold water. Again, cold is going to be crucial for us because the indigo contains an enzyme that breaks down with higher temperatures. And so we want to make sure that we maintain a cool environment so that the color can kind of maintain for as long as possible. So I'm going to move over to the table and the workspace and sort of rearrange so I can give you the demonstration of what we're doing today. Does anyone have questions before we move on in terms of like what you might need, tools, how to prepare for this process?
Not seeing any right now, Anne.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks.
I will just transition over to the other space. 1 second.
Perfect.
All right, so thanks while I reconfigured everything. I have my bowl of all of my fresh cut indigo. I have a bowl of ice right here and my blender, as well as some cold water. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to strip all of the leaves off of my stems. And it's really simple, just taking it from the top of the stem and just sort of pulling them off into the bowl. The leaves, I tried to, again, make sure that I only picked leaves that looked healthy, that were deep green. This process is important to work quickly, again, because of the enzyme that is in the plant itself. And you want to make sure that you can get this into the blender and getting your fiber worked into this as fast as possible. So I'm just going to strip all of these. If you are doing this at home, it's important to note that you want to use about 2 to 5 times in weight of your fiber. So if I'm working with 10 grams of fiber, I want to use at least 2 to 5 times more in indigo leaf. So meaning I would use 20 grams of indigo leaf or upwards of 50 grams. A lot of these have started to like flower. You can see that the flowers are these pink colors, and it's really, really beautiful, but unexpected considering that the plants yield so much blue. But the flowers are these like really bright, vibrant pink. So you can do this in batches in terms of what we're blending. So right now I've just stripped down about 4 stems. I don't have a scale on me at the moment, so I don't know what the weight actually is. So I'm just gonna, strip down until just to see, until I think it's enough. So I have about 5 stems worth of the indigo leaf. I'm going to pull my blender over. You'll want to start with the water, the cold water in the blender. It says I have a quarter, I think this is about a liter. It's a liter blender. I think most blenders are about a liter, and it's about a quarter of the way full of water. I'm going to take some ice. Again, the ice is to help maintain the temperature of the leaves and maintain the color quality because of the enzymes. Throw some of that in there. And then I'm going to mute you all because I don't think you want to hear my blender. So I will be right back. The idea is to add the indigo leaves into this water and ice mixture. And what we're trying to do is get a solution or like a liquid that's easily poured. So we don't want it too thick. We want it just to be, slightly liquidy enough just to pour out of the blender. I'm going to keep adding water because it's still a little bit too slushy. It's a little bit too thick, so I'm just going to keep adding water until it seems like it's liquid enough. All right, so that's my first batch. I'm going to pour it back into the bowl, but the bowl's empty. I took all the leaves out. It's very, very cold. What I'm going to do now is take my fabric. I'm going to start with the crepe de chine. I'm going to cut a smaller piece so that we can work with just a small piece. Again, so right now I'm only using small samples to dye with in this demonstration. But for you, you would want to make sure that you're working, if you are not an eyeballer, you want to make sure that you're working with 2 to 5 times the amount of indigo as your weight of fiber. So again, assuming I have 10 grams of fiber, you want to work with at least 20 to 50 grams of fresh indigo. So I want to show you the solution. I want to make sure you can see it. Okay, so I'm just going to take it and massage it in to the bowl. Let me take the phone off so that you all can see. Can you all see the bowl?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So as you can see, this is the crepe de chine, which has that toothier feel, and it's a little bit icy, but we're working with like an icy slushy. Okay, we're gonna keep massaging this in, and you want to work the fabric in this solution, in this mixture, for at least 5 minutes and up to about 15 minutes, letting it sit. Of course, your fingers are gonna get a little bit cold. So if you want to wear gloves or take breaks in between, as I think I might have to. This is the crepe de chine. Let me put in some of the silk habotai as well, just so we can see the color difference.
Yeah, and someone was asking, is that dry when you're putting it in, or is it pre-wetted?
It is currently dry. I think you could definitely wet it, but I'm just using it dry right now, since these are just small samples.
Thanks.
So you want to just work it in, and slowly but surely you'll start to see a color change. Let me get the wool in here as well. A lot of times people will actually strain the solution through a sieve or through a cheesecloth, because you'll see like there's these little bits of leaf in there. But since I'm just working these as samples, I didn't really think that I needed to strain it. I'm going to get the phone back up and then just keep massaging it, and then pull them out when there's some progress in the color. So what you can do is you can create these batches of indigo. So I just did a really small portion of it, but you can keep, because the blender is so small, you can keep blending small amounts of the leaves, and then keep dipping your fabric into the solution, into this mixture, to add layers of color.
And we had a question.
Oh yeah, sure.
Can I ask you, somebody asked about, you're choosing not to strain it. Does that cause any difference on the fabric, like lighter or darker areas, once it's dyed, or is there not really an impact?
Yeah, I think it certainly will. I think kind of wherever you have those leaf bits, it might create, patchiness in your garment. And so straining it is a totally reasonable method to like prevent any uneven layers of color. The only other thing with that too is, if there are uneven patches in your piece, the more times that you sort of do this and rub it into this mixture, the more times you layer the color, some of those irregularities and variations will start to go away with the layers of color.
Thank you.
I was going to say that there's also a method of doing this that doesn't require the ice and the water, and it's it's another traditional technique, where you rub the fresh leaf in with salt. It's also a very long time consuming process, but you can also, I won't be demoing that in today's, but you can also see that if you do a bit of digging around, you can see how that process works. So you can see right now that it's still just reading as green, but it is pretty interesting how the color has taken into the fabric. This is the wool. This is the silk habotai. And this is the crepe de chine. So it's these pretty cool lighter shades. Eventually it'll start turning aqua, like these aqua teal colors, but I think it just is going to take a minute to work to that point. But the reason I love this process so much is because the colors are so delicate by comparison to, these traditional blues that we looked at and talked about outside. And so you can really see like the differences in those colors just based on the fresh color versus the blue that comes from a vat. So after you've massaged the fabric and the fiber into your solution, you'll want to let it hang and dry. Ideally, most of the time I do this outside so that I can just like hang it up outside and let it air dry. But inside I can just sort of lay it out and let it. I'm going to give you a close-up look at some of the parts of the fabric where you can see the coloring come through. So I know that because we're over virtual, it might be a little bit hard to tell, but you can kind of see the color, specifically in the habotai, which is the one on the bottom, turning slightly aqua. You can kind of see it in these areas here. Yeah, maybe when the fabric is folded up, it's slightly transitioning to this aqua teal color. Can you see that?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's probably harder on the camera.
Yeah.
Here, let me try and arrange it like that. Do you see that?
Yeah, it looks a little darker.
By
Yeah.
comparison to the white.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can sort of see it slowly transitioning. I think it just, after more time in the mixture, you'll start to see more of that aqua come through. And then this is the wool. Do you see how, tell me what that color is looking like to you right now?
To me, it's like a light green, but starting to turn bluish.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty spot on. Let me see if I can hold it up for you to give you a sense. And this is what the fabric started out as. The fabric started out as more of this white color, so you can kind of see it, the differences. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? And this is the crepe de chine versus the dyed crepe de chine, and then the wool. But yeah, I'm going to keep doing this. Does anyone have questions about this process so far?
Yeah, we've had a few questions come in. Somebody was asking if you soaked it overnight, would the color get darker?
No, because this process, again, is sort of something that you need to work quickly with. I think the maximum amount of time that you would want it soaking is 15 to 20 minutes. And beyond that, I don't know that it does very much. But yeah, you can work and let it sit in that mixture for about 15 to 20 minutes for your like maximum yield. Are you seeing that color come through more?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So letting it sit out and kind of letting it, and then bring it back into the solution, I think is helpful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Someone else was asking, does it fade when you wash it?
Yeah, so as with all naturally dyed processes, um, you know, it is going to fade slightly with washes and with exposure to sun. And so when you do this process, you want to make sure that you are hand washing it. You know, these are special garments that you've hand dyed, so just being a little bit more cautious with it, and maybe not just tossing into the wash like every time you wear it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think the color is very much coming through now. If you can see that.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's this like gorgeous aqua color that is so special and unique to this process, you know?
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Here's a question. Someone asked, does it have to be in contact with air to turn that bluish color?
So that is the process of when you're working with a vat of indigo, that oxygen is what helps create that blue color. And so, yeah, I think that drying process does help bring some of those blue tones out.
Thanks. And then a question about your blending. Someone asked, do you have a separate blender that you use just for this process?
Oh, that's a great question. So for this process, no, because it's just the leaves, ice, and water. I would say for all of my other dye things, though, I would definitely separate. I wouldn't want to mix any of my chemicals or any of my dyes with any of my food processes. But because this was just the three ingredients of the leaves and ice and water, I just use the normal blender, and we'll just rinse that out. But yes, I think in all other cases of dyeing and dye studio tools, I would typically just separate them. So yeah, here we are. I think, you can really start to see that happening.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so it's a pretty exciting process in my opinion. I love this. I love this whole technique. The crepe de chine is sort of coming out a little bit. Oh, you can kind of see the blue spots. You can see these like darker blue variations in the center. Do you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like slightly patchy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was from the first dip, and now going into the second dip, I think it's kind of becoming a little bit more emphasized.
Mm-hmm.
Our wool is slightly turning blue, aqua. If you can see there in some of the parts. But yeah, I can take these out, and then after taking out the samples, I would rinse them in cold water and then let them air dry, and let them sort of transition into their color after hanging.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, the best way to dry. So do you hang them out on a clothesline outdoors, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so I have the luxury of having like a clothing line outside, and I can just hang all of my freshly dyed pieces out there. But yeah, you can just leave it hanging wherever you have space until it dries.
And once you're done with your batch of dye, is there any way to store it, or you have to do it fresh each time?
This is something that you have to do fresh each time. That's just the nature of this process, but I think that's what's exciting about it. you need to work fast, and it is just very much in the moment. I don't think that this process works once the leaves are dried, but I think that's the exciting part of it. I wanted to show you in this view because I think the camera, but yeah, you can really see how much bluer it's become.
Oh yeah, yeah, we can see that.
Yeah. And that's just the same piece after it's been in that mixture.
Mm-hmm.
The crepe de chine, not quite as blue, but that, I think, again, that kind of gives you a sense of like how the different silks take color, or how different fibers take color. And so that's side by side.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And so yeah, I love how it comes out.
Yeah, those are really cool colors.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, if there's any more questions, I'm happy to take them and talk you through the process.
Sure. We just had one about did you mention using salt? And
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit more about the how much, when, and how it changes the process?
So I have only ever watched videos of how this works. I've never actually done it myself. But what I've seen is the way that I stripped the leaves. Uh, you basically are taking those same leaves and working them into a salt mixture, and then massaging these little pieces, like the garment or the fabric, into that dry rub, basically. And you're just rubbing it with the salt until that color comes through. From what I've seen in this little doc, it's a really amazing short video, but it's a very time-consuming, tedious process. I've never personally done it, so I can't tell you or speak to like how much you need, how much salt you need, how much time. But I highly recommend just doing a quick Google of that video. I'm sure there's many videos at this point, but of that process to see, because it's just really incredible how the color, and in the same way, it's a very aqua blue color. It's not going to be that deep blue, like vat blue.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
This time you used about 5 stems.
Yes.
About how much fabric, like, could you dye with that quantity?
So as you saw, it was just these smaller samples and small squares. I bet it'll vary in terms of like the shade of color that you want to get. Again, like let's see. I'll show you this piece. This was, oh, it's even darker now. It's just keeps transitioning, which is awesome. This is maybe 12 inches wide by, I don't know. It's not even a square. It's just like a little strip. And this is the shade of blue that came through. However, the thing to note is that whatever shade of color you see when the fabric is wet, it's going to dry about 1 to 2 shades lighter. And so, with those amount of stems, you could probably get a small bandana, a light shade of blue, you know. But that being said, yeah, I don't think it takes that much indigo to really experiment with. But I think that with the small amount of in total, me using or cutting about 12 stems, I think that's going to maybe help dye. That'll probably work to dye like a small bandana or a small scarf.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. I'm jumping. Hi, my name's Grace. I work at the Botanic Garden as well. Emily disconnected for a second. So I will close us out today. I just want to say thank you so much, Anne. This was such a fabulous program. I learned so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope you learned a lot, and we hope you're excited to, start dyeing with indigo at home. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending today.
I appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much, Grace.